21 years old, a promising career just beginning. One warm August night in Austin, Texas, Jennifer Ray Cave stepped into the bright lights of 6th Street, radiating the kind of optimism that drew people close. Hours later, in an off-campus apartment bathroom, investigators would find her remains alongside a blood-stained hacksaw. The gunshot that ended her life echoed through a community that thought it knew the difference between college mistakes and true evil. What happened in those final hours would expose the devastating cost of trust misplaced and reveal how quickly promise can turn to horror. Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The evening air along Austin's 6th Street carries the rhythm of summer music spilling from doorways, laughter mixing with the warm breeze, young voices promising, tomorrow will be better than today. August 16, 2005, feels electric with possibility. Jennifer Ray Cave moves through the crowd with quiet confidence. At 21, she radiates the kind of optimism that comes from hard-won progress. Her first professional position at a local law firm represents everything she's worked toward: independence, earned through night classes at Austin Community College, and determination that impressed everyone who met her. Inside the crowded bar, she spots Colton Aaron Petaniak across the room, 22, University of Texas finance student, charming in the effortless way that draws attention without trying. Their conversation flows easily over drinks, shared stories of ambition, plans for the future, the comfortable intimacy of two people discovering common ground. The community around them pulses with the energy of a college town in summer. Students and young professionals mingle freely, the boundaries between dreams and reality, blurred by youth and possibility. Austin feels safe, familiar, a place where terrible things happen to other people in other cities. As the night deepens, witnesses later recall subtle changes in the atmosphere. Colton's laughter grows louder, his gestures more expansive. The easy charm takes on an edge that Jennifer seems not to notice. Those who knew him recognize the signs, the glassy intensity that accompanies his growing methamphetamine habit, the volatility lurking beneath his polished exterior. Near midnight, they leave together. Security cameras capture them walking toward his car. Jennifer's trust evident in her relaxed posture, her willingness to follow him into the night. She has no reason to suspect that her life is measured now in hours. The Orange Tree condominiums sit just off campus, a complex where students and young professionals live in affordable anonymity. Colton's apartment feels temporary, sparse, the home of someone whose life has begun to unravel in ways not yet visible to casual observers. They enter sometime after midnight. Neighbors hear muffled music, the distant sound of conversation, then a gradual settling into silence. The building sleeps around them, unaware that horror is taking shape in apartment 88. In the early hours of August 17, a single gunshot pierces the quiet. The bullet travels through Jennifer's arm and into her heart, ending her life instantly. The forensics will later show the trajectory, the close range, the devastating efficiency of the wound. What follows defies comprehension. In the hours after Jennifer's death, as her body grows cold, Colton begins the methodical work of dismemberment. The hacksaw, the bathtub, the calculated attempt to make her disappear. Each detail will later horrify investigators who thought they had seen everything. Dawn breaks over Austin as the city wakes to another ordinary day. Coffee shops open. Traffic builds. Life continues with the rhythm of routine. In the Orange Tree condominiums, Jennifer's absence has not yet been noticed. Her car sits in the parking lot, keys still in Colton's possession, as if she might return at any moment. The morning shift arrives at the law firm, where Jennifer was supposed to begin building her future. Her desk sits empty, phone calls go unanswered. The absence feels wrong immediately. Jennifer was never late, never failed to call if plans changed. Miles away in Corpus Christi, Sharon Sedgwick feels the first stirring of maternal instinct that something is terribly wrong. Jennifer's silence stretches too long, her phone sending calls straight to voicemail. When Sharon finally reaches Colton, his dismissive tone sets off every alarm in her mind. "She's fine," he says, the words coming too quickly, with an edge that suggests anything but fine. She just needed some space. But mothers know their children's patterns, their rhythms of communication. Jennifer would never disappear without explanation, never leave work without calling. The growing dread in Sharon's chest feels like prophecy. Phone records will later place Colton at his apartment. During these conversations, his voice calm while Jennifer's body lies dismembered in his bathroom. The detective will marvel at the callousness, the ability to maintain normalcy while surrounded by the evidence of unthinkable violence. By evening, worry has transformed into desperate action. Sharon and Jim Sedgwick make the drive from Corpus Christi to Austin, following the trail of their daughter's last known movements. The city that Jennifer loved, that promised her future, now feels ominous under the weight of their fear. They find her car in the Orange Tree parking lot, windows up, doors locked, as if she had simply vanished into the summer air. The sight stops Jim cold. Jennifer was meticulous about her possessions, would never abandon her car in a place like this. Local police respond to their concerns with professional caution. Missing adults require evidence of foul play, they explain. College students disappear for days without cause for alarm. Without a warrant, they cannot force entry into private property. But Jim Sedgwick is not a man who accepts bureaucratic limitations when his daughter's life might hang in the balance. The blinds drawn tight across Colton's windows, the unnatural stillness of the apartment, the growing stench that neighbors have begun to notice, every instinct screams that waiting for legal permission means waiting too long. On the afternoon of August 18, Jim makes a decision that will save the investigation. He breaks into apartment 88, the door giving way to reveal air thick with the smell of death. Each step forward requires courage he never knew he possessed. The bathroom door sticks, warped by humidity and horror. When it finally opens, Jim faces a scene that will haunt him forever. Jennifer's body, partially dismembered, lies in the bathtub. A hacksaw rests nearby, its blade dulled by unspeakable work. The image sears itself into his memory, not just the physical horror, but the deliberate cruelty it represents. This was not the aftermath of a crime, of passion, but something calculated and cold. Someone had taken time to try to erase his daughter from existence. Within minutes, police swarm the complex. Crime scene photographers document angles that will later be presented to jurors, each image a testament to the systematic nature of the violence. The forensics team begins their meticulous work, collecting evidence that will build the foundation for justice. Austin's news stations break the story by evening. The college town's sense of safety shatters as details emerge. Students who thought they understood the boundaries of campus danger realize that evil had been living among them, hidden behind a charming smile and university credentials. The investigation begins with the urgency that accompanies fresh crime scenes. Detective teams process apartment 88 with the methodical precision that transforms chaos into evidence. Blood spatter patterns, DNA samples, tool marks on bone. Each detail adds another piece to the puzzle of Jennifer's final hours. The forensic pathologist confirms what Jim Sedgwick discovered in that bathroom. The gunshot was fatal, but the dismemberment came hours later. This distinction will become crucial in court, separating murder from the additional charge of desecrating a corpse. DNA evidence under Colton's fingernails links him directly to Jennifer. Phone records place him at the apartment during the time frame when her family was calling, desperately seeking reassurance he could not honestly provide. The digital trail begins to paint a picture of calculated deception, but the suspect himself has vanished. A nationwide alert goes out for Colton Aaron Pittignac, accompanied by photographs that show a young man whose promising exterior masked a growing addiction to methamphetamine. The University of Texas confirms his enrollment, his academic decline over recent semesters, his associations with a drug culture that had begun to consume his life. The community reels with the revelation that horror had been hiding in plain sight. Parents who thought they knew the dangers their children faced, drunk driving, sexual assault, academic pressure, now confront the reality that sometimes evil wears a familiar face. Laura Ashley Hall enters the story as more than just Colton's ex-girlfriend. Digital forensics reveal her role in his escape, phone calls and text messages that suggest careful planning rather than spontaneous flight. Her emails show a woman still emotionally tethered to a man whose capacity for violence she either ignored or enabled. Credit card records trace their path from Austin to Eagle Pass, the border crossing where Mexico becomes refuge for those fleeing American justice. Hotel receipts under false names document their 5-day attempt to disappear into anonymity. The Holiday Inn in Piedras Negras becomes the end of their run. U.S. Marshals coordinate with Mexican federal police, jurisdictional complications slowing, but not stopping the pursuit. On August 23, tactical officers breach their room with the efficiency of long practice. Colton's arrest plays out before news cameras, his handover to American authorities broadcast across networks, hungry for updates on Austin's most shocking crime. Laura is released to Mexican custody and eventually returns home, her role in the escape documented but not immediately prosecuted. The legal phase begins with Colton's return to Travis County. Prosecutors begin building a case that will need to convince 12 jurors that the charming finance student is capable of the methodical horror discovered in apartment 88. September brings the methodical work of evidence analysis. Forensic teams examine ballistics, blood spatter patterns, tool marks that match the hacksaw to metal shavings found in Colton's abandoned vehicle. Each test strengthens the chain of evidence that will anchor the prosecution's case. Pre-trial hearings begin in late 2005, the courtroom filling with media, representatives and community members seeking answers to questions that have haunted Austin for months. Defense attorneys file motion after motion, challenging the admissibility of autopsy photographs, questioning the chain of custody for DNA evidence, searching for any weakness in the prosecution's case. The judge, measured and firm, maintains courtroom decorum while ruling on evidence that will define the trial's scope. The defense's request to exclude the most graphic crime scene photographs is denied. The jury must understand the full extent of the violence to render a just verdict. Public anger builds as details emerge through court filings. Students who once felt safe walking home from bars now install additional locks, travel in groups, view every stranger with suspicion. The crime has stripped away illusions about campus safety that took years to build. Trial is set for January 2007, giving prosecutors time to organize evidence that includes hundreds of photographs, digital records, forensic reports, and witness statements. The delay also allows the community's raw grief to evolve into a demand for justice that will fill the courtroom when proceedings begin. January 2007 arrives with the weight of expectation. The courthouse steps fill with reporters and supporters. Jennifer's family, flanked by friends who have traveled from across Texas to witness the pursuit of justice. Inside, potential jurors face questions about their ability to view graphic evidence without letting emotion override reason. Opening statements reveal the battle lines that will define the trial. The prosecution presents Colton as a calculated killer, whose post-murder behavior demonstrates consciousness of guilt and complete disregard for human dignity. They detail the single gunshot that ended Jennifer's life, then focus extensively on the hours of dismemberment that followed. The defense counters with a narrative of substance abuse and mental failure, degradation, arguing that methamphetamine had destroyed Colton's capacity for rational judgment. They acknowledge the horror while pleading for understanding of a mind damaged by addiction. Text messages between Laura Hall and Colton emerge as crucial evidence, showing coordination and planning in the hours after Jennifer's death. These digital communications contradict any suggestion that his actions were purely impulsive, revealing instead a man capable of methodical thinking even in crisis. Forensic witnesses take the stand with clinical precision, describing wound patterns, blood spatter analysis, and the timeline established through scientific examination. Their testimony transforms horror into data, making the unbearable facts accessible to jurors who must decide guilt or innocence based on evidence rather than emotion. The trial's midpoint arrives with Laura Hall's recorded statements to police, interviews that reveal her knowledge of Colton's actions and her decision to assist his escape. This evidence transforms the narrative from a story of individual violence to one of conspiracy and calculated flight from justice. Her admissions on tape carry devastating weight: acknowledgement that she helped coordinate their border crossing, secured false identification, and maintained contact with Colton while knowing he was wanted for murder. The recordings play in a courtroom that falls completely silent, jurors leaning forward to catch every word. Defense attorneys call for a mistrial, arguing that Hall's statements prejudice their client beyond any possibility of fair consideration. The judge denies the motion, ruling that the evidence directly relates to consciousness of guilt and the defendant's state of mind following the crime. Community pressure intensifies as the trial progresses. Vigils for Jennifer continue outside the courthouse, her photographs surrounded by candles and flowers that volunteers replace each morning. The demonstration serves as a quiet reminder that behind all the legal maneuvering lies a young woman whose life was cut short. True crime followers flood online forums with theories and analysis, dissecting every piece of evidence released to the public. The case becomes a national obsession, featured on television programs that examine the intersection of privilege, addiction, and violence in American college culture. Sharon and Jim Sedgwick take the witness stand with dignity that silences the courtroom. Their testimony provides crucial timeline evidence, but more importantly, it humanizes Jennifer beyond the horrific circumstances of her death. They describe her dreams, her work ethic, her kindness to others. Sharon's voice remains steady as she recounts the growing dread that led them to drive to Austin, the futile phone calls with Colton, the decision to break into his apartment. Her composure under cross-examination demonstrates the strength that sustained her family through months of unimaginable grief. Jim's testimony about discovering Jennifer's body carries weight beyond legal evidence. His description of forcing open the bathroom door, of facing horror no parent should endure, connects the crime's abstract brutality to human cost. Several jurors wipe away tears as he speaks. The defense's cross-examination probes for any inconsistency in their recollection, any detail that might suggest confusion or contaminated memory. But the Sedgwicks' accounts remain consistent, their pain authentic, their determination to see justice done unwavering. Community members pack the courtroom gallery, many standing when seating fills beyond capacity. Their presence represents Austin's collective demand for accountability, a city that refuses to let Jennifer's death disappear into legal technicalities. Closing arguments arrive with the weight of months of testimony behind them. Prosecutors weave evidence into a narrative of deliberate murder, followed by calculated concealment, emphasizing the post-mortem, dismemberment as proof of consciousness, and complete absence of remorse. They remind jurors that Jennifer's trust brought her to apartment 88, that she had no reason to suspect the danger waiting in a place that should have been safe. The gunshot may have been sudden, they argue, but everything that followed required planning and methodical execution. Defense attorneys make their final appeal for understanding rather than vengeance, describing a young man whose promising future was destroyed by addiction. They acknowledge the crime's horror while arguing that mercy, not maximum punishment, serves justice better. The jury deliberates for hours that stretch into evening. Their faces reveal the burden of weighing evidence that includes some of the most disturbing crime scene photographs in Travis County history. Each hour of silence builds tension in a courtroom where families on both sides wait for a verdict that will change everything. When they return, the foreman's voice carries the weight of collective judgment. Guilty of murder in the first degree. The words echo through a courtroom where relief and sorrow mix in ways that feel both necessary and incomplete. February 2007 brings sentencing with the gravity that accompanies irreversible judgment. The judge's words carry beyond the courtroom, establishing consequences that will echo through decades. 55 years in prison, a sentence that acknowledges both the crime's severity and the possibility of eventual redemption. Colton receives the news with detachment that chills observers. No visible emotion, no acknowledgement of Jennifer's family, no recognition that his actions destroyed multiple lives. The absence of remorse reinforces every harsh word spoken about his character during trial. Appeals will follow, as they must in capital cases, but the evidence that convicted him remains unshakable. Forensic science, digital records, and witness testimony create a foundation that survives every legal challenge. Justice, once achieved, proves remarkably durable. Austin begins the slow process of healing, though certain scars remain permanent. The Orange Tree condominiums become synonymous with tragedy, students avoiding rentals there despite competitive pricing. West Campus implements new security measures, acknowledging that safety requires vigilance beyond what anyone previously imagined necessary. Laura Ashley Hall's separate trial unfolds with less media attention but equal legal gravity. Charged with tampering with evidence and hindering apprehension, she faces prosecutors who paint her as an enabler whose loyalty enabled additional suffering for Jennifer's family. Digital evidence reveals the extent of her assistance coordinating their border crossing, securing temporary shelter, maintaining communication with a fugitive wanted for murder. Her recorded statements to police, played again for a new jury, demonstrate knowledge that makes her silence complicit. The defense argues emotional manipulation, describing a young woman whose judgment was compromised by obsessive attachment to a man whose true nature she failed to recognize. They present her as another victim of Colton's influence, damaged by association rather than evil by choice, but the evidence suggests calculation rather than mere influence. Hall's emails and phone records show planning that extended beyond emotional reaction, decision-making that prioritized Colton's freedom over Jennifer's family's need for closure. Guilty verdicts on both charges bring a 10-year sentence that acknowledges her role, while recognizing degrees of culpability. The punishment satisfies legal requirements without providing the emotional satisfaction that comes with primary accountability. Years pass with the steady rhythm of appeals and denials. Colton's defense team challenges every aspect of his conviction, searching for procedural errors or constitutional violations that might overturn the verdict. Each motion requires response from prosecutors who must defend their work years after its completion. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reviews evidence with the thoroughness that capital cases demand. Forensic testimony undergoes re-examination, Witness credibility faces fresh scrutiny. Legal procedures receive microscopic analysis, but the foundation built by investigators and prosecutors proves unshakable. In 2015, final appeals exhaust themselves against the weight of evidence. The state's highest criminal court denies Colton's last request for a new trial, cementing his conviction with the authority of completed legal process. Justice, achieved through years of careful work, finally stands complete. Media coverage revives with each major ruling, bringing Jennifer's story back to public attention. Local news stations revisit the crime's impact on Austin's sense of safety, interviewing campus security officials about measures implemented in response to the tragedy. The community's memory remains complex horror at the violence, but also pride in the investigation that brought swift justice. Jennifer's death became a catalyst for change, improving safety protocols that protect other young women from similar dangers. National attention arrives through CBS's 48 Hours, and Catherine Casey's book, A Descent into Hell, bringing Jennifer's story to audiences beyond Texas. The coverage forces the Sedgwick family to relive their loss in public forums, but also amplifies their advocacy for victims' rights. These retellings serve purposes beyond entertainment, educating viewers about warning signs they might not otherwise recognize. Jennifer's trust, her willingness to follow Colton to his apartment, becomes a teaching moment about dangers that hide behind familiar faces. Academic researchers begin studying the case as an example of how substance abuse can escalate to extreme violence, particularly when combined with certain personality disorders. Colton's profile becomes a cautionary tale in criminal psychology courses across the country. The Orange Tree Condominiums eventually changes ownership and name, but its reputation proves harder to modify. Real estate agents still encounter prospective tenants who recognize the address, who choose other housing rather than live where such horror unfolded. Laura Hall's release on parole in 2018 brings brief media attention and renewed debate about her role in the crime. Victim advocates argue that 10 years was insufficient for someone who helped a killer escape justice, while others suggest that her sentence appropriately reflected her level of culpability. West Campus transforms over the years, new security measures becoming standard rather than exceptional. Surveillance cameras monitor common areas. Lighting improves along pedestrian routes. Emergency call boxes appear at regular intervals. Jennifer's death contributed to changes that likely prevented other tragedies. The community's memory evolves from raw grief to purposeful remembrance. Annual vigils mark the anniversary of Jennifer's death, but focus increasingly on celebrating her life rather than mourning her loss. Her scholarship fund helps other young women pursue educational dreams, similar to those that brought her to Austin. Landlords throughout the area implement background checks and security protocols that were considered unnecessary before August 2005. The tragedy taught hard lessons about the vulnerability of young people living independently for the first time, lessons that inform safety practices across similar college communities. Local police departments study the case as an example of effective investigation techniques, particularly the coordination between multiple agencies that led to swift arrests. Despite the suspect's flight to Mexico, the investigation becomes a model for handling similar cases involving jurisdictional complications. Sharon and Jim Sedgwick channel their experience into advocacy that extends far beyond their personal loss. They speak at victims' rights conferences, work with legislative committees considering criminal justice reforms, and provide support to other families navigating similar tragedies. Their public appearances demonstrate remarkable grace under circumstances that would justify bitterness or withdrawal from public life. Instead, they transform their pain into purpose, ensuring that Jennifer's death contributes to protecting others from similar fates. The annual memorial services they organize become community gatherings that honor not just Jennifer, but all victims of violent crime. These events build connections between families who might otherwise suffer in isolation, creating networks of support that outlast individual tragedies. Their advocacy contributes to legislative changes in victim notification procedures and extends the rights of families during criminal proceedings. These reforms ensure that other parents won't face some of the bureaucratic obstacles that complicated their search for Jennifer. Media interviews with the Sedgwicks consistently emphasize Jennifer's life rather than the circumstances of her death. They describe her ambitions, her kindness, her determination to build a meaningful career through education and hard work. These portraits preserve her memory beyond the tragedy that made her name known. Present-day Austin carries subtle reminders of lessons learned through tragedy. Campus safety programs include education about recognizing signs of dangerous behavior, trusting instincts about threatening situations, and maintaining contact with family members when social plans change unexpectedly. Police departments across Texas reference the investigation as an example of effective evidence collection and interagency cooperation. The swift identification and arrest of suspects, despite their flight to another country, demonstrates the importance of thorough initial investigations and strong professional relationships between law enforcement agencies. Criminal justice students study the case as an example of how forensic evidence can overcome defense arguments about mental incapacity or diminished responsibility. The physical evidence collected from Apartment 88 proved sufficient to secure conviction despite defense claims about addiction-induced impairment. The University of Texas implements enhanced counseling services and intervention programs designed to identify students whose substance abuse or mental health issues might escalate to dangerous levels. These preventive measures, informed partly by Colton's academic and personal decline, aim to provide assistance before problems become irreversible. Colton Aaron Pitoniak remains incarcerated in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, his appeals exhausted, his sentence stretching decades into the future. Prison records show little indication of remorse or acknowledgement of responsibility for Jennifer's death and its aftermath. Psychological evaluations conducted during his incarceration reveal the complex intersection of personality disorders and substance abuse that contributed to his capacity for extreme violence. These studies inform treatment programs for other inmates with similar profiles. His case becomes a reference point in discussions about how promising young people can become capable of unthinkable acts, particularly when addiction combines with certain psychological vulnerabilities. The transformation from finance student to convicted murderer illustrates how quickly lives can derail without appropriate intervention. Laura Hall completes her parole supervision and attempts to rebuild a life marked permanently by her association with one of Texas's most notorious crimes. Her efforts to maintain privacy conflict with public interest in her post-release activities, creating ongoing tension between rehabilitation and accountability. The cultural impact of Jennifer's story extends beyond criminal justice into broader conversations about campus safety, substance abuse intervention, and the warning signs of dangerous behavior. Her case appears in textbooks, documentaries, and academic research that examines violence against women in college environments. True crime enthusiasts continue analyzing details of the investigation, evidence collection, and legal proceedings. Online forums, dedicated to the case, maintain active discussions about forensic techniques, prosecutorial strategies, and the effectiveness of the sentences imposed. Academic conferences on criminal justice and victim advocacy regularly feature presentations about the case, focusing particularly on the role of family members in advancing investigations and the importance of swift action when young people disappear under suspicious circumstances. The story's enduring resonance reflects its embodiment of every parent's worst nightmare, a child's trust betrayed by someone who appeared safe, promising dreams destroyed by evil hiding behind familiar faces. These universal fears ensure that Jennifer's case remains relevant beyond its specific facts. Contemporary discussions about the case often focus on preventable factors, the warning signs of Colton's deteriorating mental state, the intervention opportunities missed by friends and family, the institutional failures that allowed his problems to escalate unchecked. Mental health professionals use his profile to illustrate how substance abuse can accelerate underlying personality disorders, creating combinations that prove dangerous to both users and those around them. These case studies inform treatment protocols and early intervention strategies. The legal precedents established through his trial and appeals continue influencing how similar cases are prosecuted, particularly regarding the admissibility of graphic evidence and the challenge of proving intent in cases involving substance abuse. Jennifer's legacy lives through scholarship funds, safety improvements, and legislative changes that emerged from her family's advocacy. These tangible results ensure that her death contributed to protecting others, transforming tragedy into purpose through the determination of those who loved her most. Austin remembers her not just as a victim, but as a catalyst for positive change. The safety measures implemented after her death, the awareness raised about dangerous warning signs, and the support systems developed for victim families represent a community's commitment to honoring her memory through action. The investigation that brought justice for Jennifer demonstrates the importance of persistent detective work thorough evidence collection, and strong cooperation between law enforcement agencies. These lessons continue informing police training programs throughout Texas and beyond. Forensic advances since 2005 would likely have solved the case even more quickly, but the techniques available at the time proved sufficient to build an unshakable foundation for conviction. The physical evidence collected from Apartment 88 created a scientific record that survived every legal challenge. The swift arrest of suspects despite their flight to Mexico illustrates the value of established relationships between American and Mexican law enforcement agencies. These professional connections, maintained through ongoing cooperation agreements, enable rapid response when criminals attempt to escape across international borders. Congressional testimony by victim advocates, including members of Jennifer's family, contributed to legislation strengthening victim rights and improving notification procedures for family members during criminal investigations. These reforms ensure that other families receive better support during their most difficult moments. Years have passed, but Jennifer Ray Cave's story endures as Austin's most haunting reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces. Her photograph, smiling, optimistic, full of plans for the future, now serves as both memorial and warning. The community that once felt secure in its familiarity learned to maintain vigilance without surrendering hope. Campus safety improvements protect new generations of students who may never learn the full story of why their environment feels safer than it once did. Justice was served through the dedication of investigators, prosecutors, and family members who refused to let Jennifer's death disappear into statistics. Their persistence ensured that her killer faced consequences, that her memory was honored, and that her story became a force for positive change. The case closes not with celebration, but with the quiet satisfaction that comes from truth revealed and accountability achieved. Jennifer's life, though cut short, continues influencing the safety and well-being of others through the changes her death inspired. Her legacy reminds us that behind every crime statistic lies a human being whose dreams mattered, whose loss diminished the world, and whose memory deserves more than silence. In remembering Jennifer, Austin honors not just her life, but the commitment to justice that her death demanded and ultimately received.